This is CityCast Seattle. I'm Jane C. Hu, and here's what Seattle's talking about. Should our local government use direct democracy to make decisions? And what have we learned from the World Cup? One way to look at this is its impact on local businesses. You've probably seen the images of tourists and locals packing the waterfront and Pioneer Square during World Cup match days. The president and CEO of the Downtown Seattle Association called the energy downtown electric. And ahead of projections by our local tourism board that the event would generate $929 million, local businesses were hopeful that some of that money would flow to them, especially those in the neighborhoods closest to the stadium. But the influx of visitors did not deliver for all businesses. Here to discuss, we have Vince Vu, owner of An Oi, a bake shop in the International District. Vince, you just opened the doors to your brick and mortar shop in the Chinatown International District a couple months ago. What hopes did you have for your new business ahead of the World Cup, and how has An Oi fared?
You know, ahead of the World Cup, it was really interesting because the city did quite a good job in prepping all of us businesses to see what to expect for the World Cup. I felt really, really hyped. I mean, folks were saying that we're going to have to double our staff and quadruple our inventory. I took that with a grain of salt as well, because many of the other existing business owners here in the CID were skeptical of large-scale events like this. But I was really, really excited for the event. At the very least, I thought it'd bring in some extra energy to the CID.
What were you told to prep? Or what kind of messages were you getting about prepping?
Oh my gosh, it was like, here's how to rapidly hire 20 people in 10 days. Here's how to streamline your menu so you can serve quadruple the amount of customers. Here's how to serve to tourists that don't speak English. And so here's how to improve your menu. So it was very much geared towards the tourists that were going to be here and very much geared towards preparing us businesses to serve all of them.
So what did you actually do to prep? You said you kind of took it with a grain of salt, so maybe you didn't do all of the things that they recommended, like hiring 4 times the amount of people.
Yeah, I didn't do everything. To be honest, I did a lot less than I wanted to. And that was in large part because many of the existing businesses here told me to tamper my expectations. And so all I really did was increase my inventory a little bit and keep an eye on staffing levels.
Yeah. And so how did it turn out? How has business been for you all?
I'm very sad to say that the World Cup days are some of the lowest sales days that I've ever had in my business. In particular, the US games, the Australia and US game was the worst sales day I've ever had in the history of my business, including from when I was a pop-up, which makes me really sad. I was really shocked, I think, and call it being naive, but it was stark. It was stark to sort of be in an empty shop and see the crowds around Chinatown, the crowds around the ID. The streets were really packed, but the tourists weren't as interested in going into any of the stores. It was so dead in my shop that I was able to leave and walk around and check out other shops and just see, is it me? Is it my shop? And I was even more sad to find out that all the other shops around Chinatown were also empty. And so you have this really interesting dynamic where the streets are packed, people are really excited, the energy is really nice outside, but then all of the shops in our neighborhood are empty.
Why? Why do you think this happened?
There's a couple of different reasons. I think that there's very little overlap between sports tourists and culturally specific institutions. I think that when you have normal locals and normal tourists that want to come to see Seattle, they're trying to hit kind of the landmarks, right? They're trying to hit Pike Place Market, they're trying to hit the waterfront, they're trying to hit Cary Park, and they're trying to hit Chinatown. And those are established places that tourists would want to come and visit. I think when you have sports tourists in particular, they're following their teams, right? They're following their teams. So it doesn't quite matter what city they're going to. And so I think what they're here for is for sure the game experience and less of the city experience. And so I think that's one piece, right? The tourists don't end up patronizing stores that, aren't right next to the stadium or aren't bars or aren't quick service food. I think the second part is locals stay away from the area. They work from home. Their companies tell them to work from home on these days because it's going to be challenging. But the thing about the ID is that we serve locals. We're not geared towards tourists. We're geared towards people that live here. And so I think we have the double whammy of locals staying home and tourists being uninterested in shopping at our culturally specific businesses.
Yeah, no, like the people who know how great the food is in the CID are maybe like, maybe today I'll sit this one out. Vince, I saw that you laid out some ideas for what the city maybe could have done to better support businesses in the CID. What would you like to see moving forward? Is there a way to try and drive more folks who are coming from out of town to the CID? Or if we're talking about this, double whammy, trying to convince locals that they should still come out and be downtown, even if it is going to be crowded downtown.
I think one thing that I'd really love to see a focus on going forward for large scale events is a focus on the locals first. I'd love for tourists to come visit our city. But first, we got to make sure that the neighborhoods are still here and still good for the locals, right? So I would love to see these policies, instead of focusing on spending money to hold workshops on teaching us business owners how to cater to tourists, I'd love to see that money instead be diverted to programs that encourage locals to come to the neighborhood anyway. Transit campaigns, like encouraging locals to take transit to those neighborhoods. Maybe there's some sort of voucher that if they took a train here, if they took the link here, then we could reimburse them something. Or maybe there's sort of local parking validation programs or things like that that help encourage locals to still come so that the businesses here can survive. And then again, the tourists that come after them, the tourists that come in with them, that's a benefit. But I really think that the programs and policies should be focused on the locals first.
Okay, so to that end, if I feel like a lot of folks come to Seattle over the course of the summer, like I know I always find it a fun opportunity to go out and show people my favorite stuff. Like even if I'm not going out every single day and trying to hit all my favorite spots, like having a guest in town is a good excuse to kind of show them the best of the city. So if you had to plan a day of eating in the CID, besides stopping at An-Oy, obviously, what would you recommend people do?
Okay, I got you. There are so many places across the ID that I would take folks to. And when I say across the ID, I mean I have a separate itinerary for Japantown, Chinatown, and Little Saigon.
Okay.
But let's say we have one afternoon. Okay,
Great.
We have one afternoon. First, starting in Japantown, I would go to Onibaba, which is just around the corner from my shop. They have amazing Japanese street food, relatively unknown, very popular, very tiny storefront, tastes just like Tokyo. I would very highly much encourage that for my Japantown offering. In Chinatown, I think I gotta go with Ringo Curry. Amazing Japanese curry. Their claim to fame is that they use apples in their curry. And so there's a delicious sweet flavor. I recommend you always get the level 2 hot.
Okay.
That like the spiciness balances out the sweet. It's perfect. And then if we can squeeze in a little trip to Little Saigon, I gotta recommend Ba Nia House and More, right on Jackson. And they are a very unassuming shop, but they have Vietnamese street food that you can never find anywhere else. And so I've got to recommend that place. And that's my abbreviated tour. But I mean, I'm someone who probably like eats way too much for just one person.
Love it.
But yeah, I encourage people to really think about Chinatown, the different neighborhoods inside of the ID as sort of distinct, but all interlinked. So if you're spending a day out in the International District, make sure you visit Japantown, Chinatown, and Little Saigon all together.
Yes. As my dad says, life is from eating to eating. He said that once when we were on vacation, because I mean, it sometimes does feel like you're just bouncing from place to place, just eating. But that is the best way, I think, to experience the CID. And tons of little shops to like pop in and hang out, go to the Wing Luke. Anyway, we could plan a whole CID day and I could talk about this all day, Vince. But Vince Fu of An-Oy, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experience. And I hope people come by and continue to patronize the CID.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about more lessons that we're taking from the World Cup. We're still basking in the afterglow of the World Cup and thinking about what we can learn from our time as a host city. Joining me to discuss, we've got Naomi Ishisaka, social justice columnist at the Seattle Times. Welcome, Naomi.
Great to be here.
And we have Brett Hamil, writer, performer, and the cartoonist behind the weekly series Doom Loop. Hi, Brett.
Yay, Belgium, I guess.
Yeah, it was kind of a rough time on Monday night being at a brewery and everyone except the one Belgium fan being kind of bummed out. Well, Naomi, you recently wrote about your impressions of the World Cup in your Seattle Times column. I know you got to go to the Egypt-Iran game, and so you wrote about that and just kind of your general impressions of how it's been having the World Cup in town. What did you see there, and what have you taken away from the World Cup being in town?
I would say I was pretty agnostic about the whole thing. I was certainly no soccer fan whatsoever. I've only seen one previous game to the Egypt-Iran game. But I think I really came away from the experience, not just from that game, but just the way the city has kind of come alive with a kind of a newfound appreciation for, one, how this is the sport that people around the world, particularly outside of the United States, are extremely passionate about. They live and breathe soccer. And as someone who cares about people of all kinds and backgrounds, I think that it's hard not to kind of get enraptured by that, and I certainly was. And going downtown and seeing the crowds and people from all different backgrounds and walks of life, it's been just really beautiful to see. And, the game that I went to, Egypt and Iran, had all this lead up about, is it going to be something to celebrate Pride, because it's a Pride match, or is it something where homophobia is going to sort of run rampant? And it was just a truly joyous experience. And you saw, pockets of folks, Egyptian fans, Iranian fans, who were clearly having the absolute time of their lives. And it meant so much to them for their teams to be playing the World Cup. It meant so much for them for their teams to be there. And given how repressive our government has been in terms of travel and folks not being able to get visas and ability to travel here, I think for the local diasporic communities, especially for running American community, it was huge to have that here. And so I think it was just a really beautiful thing to see.
I know ahead of the World Cup, there were concerns about potentially contentious protest at the Egypt-Iran game.
Yeah.
I know that, Mayor Katie Wilson decided to turn on the cameras in the stadium district ahead of the World Cup, citing potential intel about potential threats. I know that there was also concern over widespread ICE interference since there were ICE officers providing security for the matches. I'll note that there actually have been 12 arrests in the last few days by ICE agents in Western Washington, but none seemingly tied to the matches downtown. I know that there was some cynicism ahead of the World Cup, some uncertainty around what it was going to do in town. I mean, it seems like a lot of those concerns didn't come to pass. Like, what did we do right? Or did we just get lucky?
That's a really good question. I think the jury's still out on how the World Cup benefited small businesses, how the World Cup benefited the Chinatown International District. The sort of early reports look like it did not. And it was unfortunately a kind of repeat of the All-Star game situation. And I think, I kind of regret not having followed up on a column I wrote about the All-Star game a few years ago to kind of ask, like, what's being done in preparation to make sure this doesn't happen again, given what happened with the All-Star game and how publicized that was, that, surely there were people who were working furiously on making sure there wasn't a repeat. And it looks like that didn't happen. And I think that's really unfortunate and something we need to start to unpack to find out, if we know that sports fans are not going to be pouring into culturally specific communities to watch soccer, then what else could be done? Maybe there's ways you could have created like a little, kiosk or food cart in the places where the games were actually happening and people watching them, that people could sell dim sum or whatever it might be, or pulled pork or whatever it might be that they might be selling, and really, really creative about it. And I think, unfortunately, it's hard to put on an event of this size. Of course, it's a mega event, but at the same time, for a community to consistently be treated in somewhat of an afterthought or being like a pass through instead of a destination, it's just pouring salt into an already painful wound.
Brett, what do you think? Did we do something right to avoid some of the major pitfalls, or did we just get lucky?
I mean, I think we definitely got lucky, but there was a lot of groundwork laid already with all of the pedestrian and bike-friendly amenities downtown from the waterfront all the way to the stadium. That's stuff that, like, you often don't see the big picture. I mean, I think the big win for a World Cup is urbanists in Seattle. Like, this was their time to shine and to say, we built that. The fact that you could walk from here to there and feel legitimately safe, and there's all these public watch parties and such, like, that is the urbanist vision of the city. And these are things that took years and years to plan and build that have nothing to do with the current administration, the current government leadership. These are things that were like carried forward generation after generation, basically, if you include the light rail in that. So that was pretty magical to see. It was nice to see all the urbanists gloating on blue sky and taking selfies and talking about how downtown was lit and such. I enter into these big sporting events just with automatic cynicism, multimillionaire players, evil team owners. You've got FIFA, which is probably one of the most corrupt organizations in the world, who has supported like actual slavery in other host countries and such. So, it's so easy to be like, just shut it out, take this shit elsewhere. But I mean, I have to say it warmed my cockles a little too, as someone who has zero interest, right there with Naomi in terms of like, I don't know that I've ever watched a full soccer game, but I got pretty pumped. And then now there's Instagram is feeding me all these soccer highlights. And I'm like, sure, that's actually the best way to consume soccer is just in highlight reels. So I'll take that. That's fine.
So you all just mentioned that there were these big watch parties in Pioneer Square. I feel like the distribution of resources and attention, and I think just frankly, amount of money spent in different neighborhoods really varied. And Naomi, you kind of alluded to this too in what you were saying. We actually just talked with Vince Vu of On Oi about how his business in the Chinatown International District fared. And I've seen people around town asking why there weren't watch parties in the CID in the same way that there were in Pioneer Square. And I saw that actually a few days ahead of Monday's round of 16 game, the CID Business Improvement Area hosted a watch party in Hing Park. And there are a few more coming for the semi and quarterfinals as well. This all makes me wonder, is it too little too late? Or is there still time to kind of capitalize on that energy that we have going on downtown and hope that folks remember that they can also go eat in the CID?
Yeah, maybe a little bit of both. I mean, certainly having the games already done yesterday is a blow to that kind of foot traffic. But there's still going to be tens of thousands of people downtown for their own watch parties, and just kind of as long as the tournament's going on. And I think part of it is also just setting patterns for local folks too, to know that this is a place they can go. They've heard all these horror stories, and when they get there, it's going to be nothing like they expect. And feeling a little bit more committed to supporting those local businesses and supporting those mom and pop shops that have really suffered the harms and really deserve the benefits of when things are going well. But yeah, I mean, to miss that first couple weeks, I think is really tough.
Speaking of trying to get locals to change patterns, I think one major change we're seeing is the density of people who are just hanging out in Pioneer Square.
Yeah.
One of our producers put it this way, like that for as long as they've lived here, Pioneer Square has kind of bounced between being a gathering place for people that are going to some large city event versus being a place where many people live. And I think that ahead of the World Cup, we definitely made some changes as a city. We have seen some sweeps. We've seen folks being incentivized to try and move elsewhere. And Naomi, one of the things that you mentioned in your column actually was wondering if the city would clean up by shuffling struggling unhoused people from place to place. I'm curious if you all think if Pioneer Square will continue to be a place that people are gathering for these large events, or whether it's going to bounce back to being this go-between where folks are actually living versus, other folks in town are trying to gather.
I mean, I performed at the old Comedy Underground right there in Occidental Plaza for over a decade. So I've seen every phase. In fact, I performed at the old Comedy Underground that was like a block away as well. So I've seen every permutation, every season. of this area. And yes, it's always like that, especially in the summer where I'd be waiting outside the Comedy Underground for them to let the comedians in for open mic night, where you would see 2 to 3 fights among homeless folks and people that were kind of camped out in the plaza just in a half an hour. And then, the city, different maybe police leadership shoved them somewhere else. And to me, that what the scariest thing about Pioneer Square was getting out of the late show at around midnight and having the club folks and their shenanigans going on. It's just such a weird and cool part of town, and half those buildings aren't even earthquake retrofitted, and it's just such a tenuous, strange place that you really have got to go check out. So I hope, as Naomi was saying, locals are getting that muscle memory too. What does it feel like to get on this new train route and ride it to a new place? Okay, I've done that. Here's where I tap my card, etc. Once that is ingrained in people, I think it can only help.
Yeah, I agree. Folks always overuse, I think, the term activation. They're like, we're going to activate the space. And I kind of hate that term.
Yes.
But I think we've kind of seen that in action, the past few weeks. And to Brett's point, like having folks on the street, just thousands and thousands of folks. And obviously this is a unique situation, but just having all those people on the street has changed, I think the kind of culture of the city. There's just people everywhere right now. And I think there's something about that that's creating this energy and kind of excitement and this vibe. I mean, we were just talking about in our news meeting, it's almost like a little bit of something of a letdown. I mean, obviously the tournament's still going on, but to have some of these big watch party locations closing, kind of got used to that, kind of got used to going to Pacific Place for the first time in God knows how long, and seeing like thousands of people in there watching soccer and talking and hanging out. And it's been really beautiful to see. And I think that keeping that kind of momentum up is, I think, going to be really important, especially in the months where it's not quite so fun to be out and about.
Yeah.
It also shows that activation is not merely something done for the downtown businesses and corporate landlords. It's something done for the people who will show up there. And just that slight shift of focus really could pay off for us. Because we see every 2 to 3 years, there's a mayor or a council member that says we need to save downtown. And this is the kind of thing that you would do to say, I don't think that helps. I don't think it helps the landlords or the corporate tenants, but the people working in bars, the working class folks who are down there making it happen. Hopefully there's, I heard some of the bars were it's the busiest they've literally ever been. So.
Well, it seems like one thing that everyone I've talked to about this has agreed on is, let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. Keep going out. All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the other big headlines of the week. It's Wednesday, and of course, there's already so much news going on in town, but we're going to bring you a rundown of the latest big headlines in town in our midweek medley. On Tuesday morning, Mayor Wilson announced the Stadium District cameras are now off. She had announced ahead of the World Cup that due to credible threats, the cameras would be on during the period we were hosting the World Cup. And she reiterated that the city continues to run its CCTV cameras in the CID, downtown, and Aurora, and will wait until the results of an audit about the use and security of the cameras to decide whether the range of CCTV cameras elsewhere will expand. What do you all make of this announcement? I know that there is some speculation about how quickly the cameras might be turned off after the games. And I mean, the game was Monday night. Tuesday morning, Wilson made an announcement.
It's such an intractable situation. I mean, credible threats. Do you trust the Kash Patel FBI to give you the straight info to a socialist mayor of a deep blue city? No, she was clearly hedging to not be on the losing end of a wager in which something bad did happen and it was immediately blamed directly on her. And for that, honestly, as someone who loathes all the security apparatus, I kind of don't blame her on that one.
Biscuit also hates the security
Biscuit is
apparatus.
Very angry about CCTV. Man, why? But going forward, let's look. There have already been long-term longitudinal studies about the efficacy of this kind of surveillance, and it almost never shows that it's good and does what it says it's going to do. So who's doing the study? Are they the people that are renting us the cameras? It's still the evidence is against them in terms of civil liberties and personal freedom, these are bad. When it becomes a political calculus about a dwindling supermajority blaming anything bad on the mayor, that's an entirely different equation, in my opinion.
Thoughts, Naomi?
I think Brett said it. I think she's in a tough position in the sense that she's been under a tremendous amount of scrutiny and criticism from folks that have been her most diehard supporters. And so, I'm not surprised that she made that call either way. To Brett's point, so many folks are trying to find things that they can pin on her as a sign that this type of governance is a failure. And so if something had happened in the games that were held here, it would have just proven their point. And then it's also true that she said she was going to turn them off after the games and wasted no time.
She stuck to her word there. And I am just overall really glad that nothing happened. That's just a major win relief all around.
Yes. and
yes.
let's there was talk of putting this up for a public referendum. Okay, let's put the cards on the table. Let's see what people really want. It is such an intractable situation. You've got victims of gun violence on one end. You've got serious civil libertarians and equity issues involved in the use of these cameras and the way they're deployed and the people they're trained on. So I don't know, maybe a public referendum is the best way to go forward with this. Let's have a vote, see what Seattle thinks.
There's actually, speaking of ways to get people involved in this decision, Snohomish County might have an idea for us. So KNKX reports that a group of Snohomish County residents are shaping the county's AI policy. In an experiment with direct democracy, 29 randomly selected county residents met over 3 weekends to discuss their county's use of AI and come up with recommendations. So I thought this was so fascinating. Participants were paid $500 for their time. And one of the participants, Theo Moriarty, a middle school teacher, said he hopes this will inspire other jurisdictions in Washington to form their own civic assemblies. So he told KNKX, there isn't a lot of trust in America for government and corporations, especially government and corporations working together. This sort of thing and the resolutions from it, I think, could go a long way to forming a baseline of trust. Is this something our local governments should implement? I mean, I do think that the security camera question could be an interesting question to put to direct democracy.
Love it. Absolutely. Randomly chosen, residents. I would love to hear what they came up with. I'm not sure it would be something I agree with, but if they are randomly enough distributed and represent enough different viewpoints, hell yeah.
I think the concern that I have, and I agree. I love that idea. I love any situation where you're asking people, especially people that are bearing the brunt of whatever the policy is, of being involved in the solution making. I think what's tricky is in our resource-strapped world, it's like jury duty, right? If you're going to give people so little money to be on a jury, you're going to sort of, by its nature, create a situation where you only have the people that have the most resources being able to afford to be on a jury. And then you're going to have an unequitable distribution of who's actually making those decisions. And I think in a case like this, $500 is, of course, better than nothing, but depends on how much time is outlaid and depends on how many days that is and whether or not you have the resources to take time away from your work or for your family to do that. So I'm all for it. Let's do that kind of thing, but let's make sure that it's done in a way that makes it possible for people to participate from all different walks of life.
Yeah, that was my question too, you can randomly select people in the same way that you randomly select them for a jury duty poll, but who is going to end up actually volunteering to spend their time that way? 3 weekends is kind of a lot, but I also really respect the folks who wanted to do their civic duty and show up for 3 weekends in a row to learn about AI and try and come up with solutions together. So they ended up coming up with 35 recommendations, and I believe those are going to be presented to the county today. So democracy, the big experiment. Okay, moving on. We had a nice reprieve from traffic for the World Cup. I've heard from a lot of folks who commute by car over the last few weeks that it's been surprisingly clear. I think a lot of folks have been either trying to avoid driving in, or tourists are mostly downtown and are taking light rail. We've had record ridership on light rail, but that reprieve is going to be over as of this Friday when Revive I-5 comes back. So a reminder to folks that I-5 northbound is going to be closed all weekend. And then starting next week, there's going to be lane closures again through the end of the year. but the express lanes will be northbound only. Curious if you all are going to have to adjust any of your driving patterns with I-5 going back to being a little hobbled by these closures.
Well, both Brett and I live in the South End.
Right.
So I think for us, like, it's one of the rare times where South End folks actually have benefited from something. I know it's not forever, but I've heard a lot of complaints from folks that live north that they've had doubling sometimes of their commutes to work. And I've actually had the opposite, going from south to north, because they've opened the express lanes that direction. So I've actually had much less of a commute in the past when they had the freeway closed. But yeah, I know that's not forever. But I think one of the things that I've thought a lot about in the last few weeks is that, the light rail and the transit systems have been really the winner of this whole World Cup experience. We've seen just enormous ridership, and not just ridership, but just, they're just really kind of shown off the power of moving so many people so fast in so many different directions. Opening the 2-line when it did was perfect timing as well, and very intentional. But I think that's really shown off what the power of transit can do. And I think hopefully made it some converts from folks that might have been skeptical of, why do we even have this thing? Why did we spend all this money on this?
Yeah, one of the top transit riderships in the world now, or at least in the US. I mean, that's something to really brag about. And it's also a data point to kind of wave in front of people who are pushing this sort of austerity agenda on transit, which we just saw yesterday in the Transportation Committee meeting, where they were trying to add all these amendments to Mayor Wilson's proposal for a sales tax hike. They were trying to add all these procedural choke points where they can have an extra way to cut off funding to bus service. But
we will be talking more about that in coming days.
I certainly hope so. You need to get Ryan Packer on here to get elbow deep in the details. But we keep seeing, we're seeing the fun side of induced demand. Build a rail line to the east side, and people actually jump on it, and it blows your mind. Every train is full. We're going to have to order bigger trains. It keeps happening, and then people still keep fighting against transit. And eventually, ideally, hopefully, they finally give up and just get on the damn train and save the money on parking and get there faster and safer.
That is what I recommend. If you are a fellow North Seattleite, get on that light rail. It is way better than sitting in that traffic. That's been my move this whole time during the Revive I-5. And how happy are we all going to be when I-5 is finally done and it's perfect, and of course no other work will ever happen on there again. We'll keep working on ourselves, even if it's inconvenient for everyone else, as one of my favorite memes about I-5 has said. That's all for today here at CityCast Seattle. Naomi Ishisaka, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
And Brett Hamil, thanks as always for joining us.
Thanks for activating my morning.
I'm your host, Jane Sihu, and listeners, we want to hear from you. Send us your thoughts about the end of the World Cup. If you're going to keep hanging out in Pioneer Square, your favorite spots in the CID, you can send us an email at seattle@citycast.fm, or you can call or text us at 206-880-3931. Until next time, see ya, Seattle.